get ready before life happens. The podcast helping you navigate life's what ifs.
Welcome to Get Ready Before Life Happens. I'm your host, Tony Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Adam Koos, president of Libertas Wealth Management and host of the Retirement Fiduciary Podcast. Adam, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here today.
No, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, excited for this conversation. So let's jump on in. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story and how did it spark an interest in financial planning?
Oh, wow. Well, it's a long story, I guess, but I'll try to keep it short. I went to school at Ohio State to be a trauma surgeon. I wanted to be a doctor just like my dad. That was kind of like my whole life. I just wanted to be just like him. He's just, to this day, he's still my hero. And then some personal things happened in my life, beginning of my senior year of college, that I won't get into because that makes the story really long. But essentially, had some big things happen to me personally in my life, and that caused me to, at a time when I didn't even have enough courses to pick a major, to pivot and essentially decide to do something else. And honestly, at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I called my dad up, walking down through campus, was kind of terrified. I wasn't sure if he was going to be upset at me, even though he's not the kind of guy that would be. And I just told him, look, I can't go to school for 7 more years, between med school for 4, then, residency for a couple of years, at least a 1-year, surgical fellowship, probably longer, honestly. But I just didn't have it in me anymore after going through some personal things. And he says, what are you going to do for a living? And I'm like, God, I don't know. I mean, I've thought about maybe doing nursing instead, but I feel like I would have always looked back and wish I would have gone the full 9 and become a doctor. So I don't want to do that. And I thought about, pharmaceuticals, but then I don't want to be working for doctors. And then, then I was getting into, well, what about software? Because I love computers and technology. It's really interesting to me, but I don't know, honestly. And he says, what about being a financial advisor? And I'm like, a financial advisor. I'm like, what are you talking? Like, what? Like, I took 1 econ class in college. All my classes were chemistry and biochemistry and biology and microbiology. And he says, my financial advisor is just not really good with people and not very good at making complex things easy to understand. And he's like, I think that you would be really good at that. And I think that the industry probably needs more people who are better at communicating and educating than they do, people who have economics degrees or finance degrees per se. So I met his financial advisor and still honestly wasn't interested because in my opinion, this industry was filled with a lack of ethics. So my biggest, I guess, barrier to entry was I didn't want to get into some industry that was filled with sales and, creeps who were trying to take, dig in people's pockets. That just wasn't who I am. I'm ethical to a fault, if there is such a thing. And this financial advisor says, this is in Cleveland. He says, go back down to Columbus, go to this seminar. If you're interested, call me. We'll probably hire you on the spot. And if you're not interested, then don't call me. So I went to the seminar and it happened to be a national brokerage firm that kind of lets you do your own thing to a certain extent. There's still goals and there's still, plenty of oversight, but it was a firm that allows you to essentially, instead of being on a sales floor, peddling stocks and cold calling all day long with your hand duct taped to the phone, it was more, I guess, big picture oriented. And I thought, you know what, looks interesting. Let me give it a shot. So I took the Series 7, started my career 10 days before the World Trade Center went down. So it was not an easy time for somebody who was at the time 21 years of age. And, I looked like I was 16. I always say, it was going uphill both ways in the snow, trying to convince people 3 times my age to trust me with their life savings when the market's precipitously falling. But I fell in love with it. My dad calls it being a financial surgeon. So even though it's not technically, surgery on a human body, it's diagnosing financial problems and doing surgery to fix those issues. And again, I just fell in love with it. And I always say I've been doing this 24 years. I haven't worked a day in my life, my adult life. So I always say it's not a job at all. I get up every day and I love what I do. My mission is just to save people from bad advice and bad advisors. So that's kind of what wakes me up every day.
Well, that's a great story. And I use a lot of medical analogies when I talk, but I have a very similar evolution as I started as a life insurance salesperson. And I quickly found that, ethics and not being pushed by sales was very important. So I became a fee only planner. And essentially what I did was I cleaned up, like we were talking pre-show, after other life insurance salespeople. Um, and,
Yeah,
diagnosing what the issues were and trying to fix them. And I share your concern, and I think the industry is getting better, but there's still a huge lack of ethics and integrity across the board, especially in insurance sales. But also, there's a lot of people selling, you know, bad financial products and
oh, for
not
sure.
thinking about it. So, for somebody younger who's kind of on the fences, how can they start thinking about ethics and, if they're being pulled by somebody saying, hey, you got to call 100 people on your first day is there a way to reconcile that you see?
Yeah, that's it was funny that just somebody posted that on LinkedIn today that I just happened to see where, is that the best way to do things these days? And obviously some firms aren't going to change. I mean, I'm not going to say what company it is, but you and I both know which company it is. You know, find 100. I mean, you're 22, 23 years old. I don't care what age you are. I mean, if you're new in this business, I think the last thing that you should be doing is, green behind the ears and cold calling all your friends and family to try and sell them something. I mean, it's a good way to lose friends, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think we may have seen the same article because the
Oh, really?
article, talked about, how, that those people lose all their friends and family because that's, what they do is they say, hey, call your friends and family,
Yeah,
and try to talk to them, but they're not thinking about what the people need. And I think that gets back to what you're talking about, from the medical perspective and the communication, because the first thing a doctor asks you is like, what are you here to see me for? The doctor doesn't walk in and say, hey, like we're having a special on knee replacements,
yeah,
like let me talk to you about knee replacements. And you're like, well, I just have a headache,
yeah,
So
yeah. We're being pushed penicillin this week, so you want some penicillin? You can
yeah, yeah, we
step
got a
right
great
up,
deal on penicillin, I can
step
get you
right
a
up.
block of penicillin,
Yeah, how much penicillin do you want? Yeah.
So, so I think that for me is I think that's a huge thing for the industry is to, and a lot of people are making that pivot from like, here's a product that we're pushing to here's, let's hear what you have to say. What problems are you trying to solve? And I know that's one of the things that, that is valuable to you is relationships. And so, where was that light bulb moment? And it sounds like you were starting to get into that, where you realized that relationships were at the heart of good financial planning rather than just returns.
I mean, it's the same reason that I think people are so worried about AI taking over the financial planning world, and it's the same answer. I mean, Mike Tyson, right, says that everybody's got a plan till you get punched in the face. And I think that that's the same when it comes to retirement planning in the market. You've got this retirement planning thing, right? And we always tell people that, you don't want to look at the market, meaning the S&P, the Dow, whatever you want to use as your major market index, as your benchmark. You want to look at your family index as your benchmark. So for me, that would be the Koch index. If it says that in my financial plan that I need to earn 4.75% net after fees and taxes from now to the day I die to hit every item on my bucket list, um, that should be my bogey. That should be my benchmark. And if I end up doing better, awesome. But I don't know that it always makes sense for every client to shoot for the stars and shoot the lights out and try to, beat the market, so to speak. And in fact, oftentimes it's a losing battle anyway, because we've been doing a lot of talk this past, 16 years now about the fact that the US markets have been the best market in the world. So there's this thing called home country bias, where if you live in Singapore, it's been easy to beat the market because you're comparing your portfolio to the Singapore stock market. If you live in Australia, you're comparing it to the ASX, Toronto, the TSX in Canada. So all you had to do was buy U.S. stocks, and you're beating the market. You live in the U.S. The U.S. market's been the best market since pretty much the 2008, 2009, with little blips of short-term underperformance versus international. And that could be changing right now, by the way, as we're recording this. But the bottom line is, I think relationships are all about, when it comes to financial planning, having that hand to hold when things go south, as they inevitably do. The market goes through a 3% drop 7 times a year. And it's not that big a deal. Maybe a year like this where it's been so good since the spring, the tariff crash. But a 5% drop, 5% pullback happens 3 times a year. We just saw one last month, and we started getting people, emailing us, calling us, worried, hey, should we be doing something? It's like, it's a 5% drop. It's not that big a deal. But when we're so used to seeing nothing but 2% drops, it feels so much worse when you're going through it. When you look at when you scan out further, the market goes through a 10% drop roughly once a year, and it goes through a severe correction of say 15% once every 18 months. But I always say it's like the seasons. Every 4 years or so, you're going to see. So every 3 years, that fourth year is going to be a big 20%, 25% drop or worse. And that's when the relationships really come into play. That's where your robo advisor, your AI is not going to pick up the slack. Who's going to keep you on track to that plan? If you look at this like a metaphor, where your journey to retirement and beyond is a big, huge, long drive across country, you're going to see all kinds of weather. You're going to see construction. There's going to be setbacks. And when you have those setbacks, it's nice to have a GPS. Or another analogy is when you're flying around the world on a plane, it's better to have a pilot than not, right? So I think that that's where relationships come into play with financial planning, is that everything's fine and good as long as the market's going up. But inevitably, the market goes down, and it does it a lot. The market breathes, and when the market goes down, whether it's a pullback, a correction, or a crash, I think most people want a hand to hold, and I'll call that 90% of the country.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think that's something, it's funny because I'm not sure I'm in love with the word correction, because it means that there's something wrong, and
Sure,
it's
fair.
the nature of the markets. It goes back to the book, which I read in college, A Random Walk Down Wall Street.
Hmm.
And and essentially it's like you just don't know which way it's going to go, no matter how sophisticated you are, no matter how many now trading algorithms you run and all things. I think Benjamin Graham talked about that, is like, okay, how can it's Mr. Market. He'll look at the same company one day, and if Mr. Market gets rained on his way to work, he's got a negative outcome, and so the market goes down. Or it's a sunny day and Mr. Market is in a good mood and the market goes up, but yet the company is exactly the same company as it was the day before. And I think that's, for me, something that people miss, and that you're alluding to, is that this is a long-term proposition. And yeah, if you look at it day to day, it's crazy.
Oh yeah.
And
It's
but
like trying to get
over.
some. It's like trying to drive across the country when your your barometer is looking down over you, sticking your head out the window and looking at the ground. I mean, you probably want to look at the GPS, right? It's like if you say, how long does it, like we live in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. It's like if I asked a client, and I've done this before, how long does it take to, how far is it from here to, say, Miami, Florida? And they'll say, oh, I don't know, maybe like 20 hours. And I was like, no, 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 in feet. Like in feet, geez, I don't know. And it's like, right, but that's how we're looking at our portfolio right now, is we're treating it like we're looking at it in terms of a ruler, as opposed to measuring it in miles or hours, right?
Yeah, I love that. Measure your performance over the long term. And I think that's something that human advisors can help with, because they can relate in a different way. And that's something, I mean, that's the huge topic of the day. Which advisors are going to be replaced by AI? And, I think Microsoft came out with a report recently that a wide percentage of advisors are going to be replaced by AI. So, so for the advisors out there who are listening to this, can you go a little bit deeper on how you feel advisors can help their clients stay on track and really keep the human element in the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's the first is planning, and some might argue, well, with AI, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, there's you can do your own financial plan online. You don't need a financial advisor for that these days. You can input all your current income sources, balances, your expenses now. You can adjust it all for inflation using AI and software. It'll give you a number for post-retirement. Obviously, those numbers change a little bit, and maybe it spits out. You could use a linear rate of return, which I don't recommend. You can do a Monte Carlo probably using AI these days. So yeah, I mean, for some people who are tech savvy enough, and again, that's why I said 10%. I'm willing to bet, but if we want to push it, I'll say 15% of the public is savvy enough to use all that technology. Maybe less than 15%, even though they're savvy enough, they don't want to spend the time. They just don't care enough. Like they don't, it's like when you sell a house. I mean, I want a realtor. Could I do it myself? Yeah, but do I want to spend the time? No. I mean, you're smart enough to, you know, do your own mortgage if you wanted to, but do you want to? I mean, really, don't you have better things to do with your time? So there's a lot of things in life I think that we pay someone else to do because our time is worth more than doing it ourselves. I pay someone to mow my lawn. This morning we had kids had a snow day. I freaking love using the snowblower. There's nothing in the wintertime, aside from maybe going skiing or going for a walk in the snow. I don't know why, what's wrong with me. I love the snowblower. It's like mowing the lawn, except it's not hot. It's like I get to be nice and cool out there and you get to see what you did, what you completed. So I think that there's a lot of people out there, and when I say a lot, on an absolute basis, probably millions of people who would rather use AI and save the money they'd otherwise spend on a financial advisor to help them with their retirement planning. But that means that there are probably another 8 times as many people who have no interest in either spending the time on it because their time's worth, better doing other things, and they'd rather hire a professional, or B, they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to use AI or the technology, and that's all assuming the market's going up. Because I reiterate, when things start to go south, even that 10 to 15% of people that can do it themselves and have the time to do it themselves, maybe they can survive a 15 to 20% drop. But when the market goes through another 2000, 2001, 2002, another mortgage crisis like 2007, 8, 9, because it'll happen again. It's just a matter of time. It's going to be pretty tough for those people to stick to their plan. And that's one of the biggest things that it seems like maybe a little to some people, but those some people I think are that 15%, that 10 to 15%. They say, I'm not going to pay somebody to hold my hand and help me stick to my plan. And that's fine. We always say we're not for everybody. Financial planning planners aren't for everybody. You have to, again, you can do it yourself as long as you have those two things. You have the interest and the time. And most people, if they don't have the interest, they won't spend the time. And again, even if they have the interest, some people don't want to spend the time doing it.
Yeah, I love that because I think that's something that we miss is like with snowblowing. That is a great example because you could hire a teenager to do that. And I'm sure there's probably teenagers, or at least there used to be teenagers who, could be hired
Yeah.
for that. But it's like you don't mind. But with other things, it's like you can learn how to do these things, but do you want to
No,
learn how to do it? And
I don't like
that's
building I don't like building a piece of furniture from Target. I don't like mowing the lawn. I don't like spreading mulch. I don't like
yeah.
sweating my brains out in the summer doing work outside. It's just not for me. Call me a baby. I don't care.
And I think that's something to remember is, like you're talking about is, with your financial planning and, the various areas of your financial life, is that sometimes it's okay to ask for help if you don't take the time. And I think that's something also that's missed is that sometimes people spend more time, as I put it, shopping for a television than they do thinking about a specific investment.
Sure.
And I think that's something, as you very well point out, I love that. You can do it if you have the time and the interest, and that people need to put the time into making these financial decisions. And I want to go back to something that you were talking about earlier, because I think this is really important, is that we don't all have the same goals. And, that's not something I think I think AI does have the ability and will develop the ability to develop more personalized paths and things like that. But I don't know if it can ever really provide that personal finance where it really looks at somebody holistically. I mean, how do you think about that? Because, when you walk in and you have a new client, you're thinking them as a person. And because you have that medical training, and also being immersed in your father's practice, I mean, how do you apply that to make sure that personal finance is personal?
Well, I mean, there's some of it's just knowledge and knowing what's out there, right? I mean, so there is a certain amount of this that goes with being a continuous learner, having a thirst for knowledge because, there's no shortage of information out there in this field, right? I mean, you start getting in the tax code and it's like, give me a break. So I think that, as an example, something that I think AI would struggle with is truly helping and solving problems for business owners and entrepreneurs in a holistic, comprehensive fashion. And I'll give you just one example. Let's just say, and I always say owners are people too, because I am one. We're, we need a retirement plan as well, even though we're an owner, right? So a business owner needs a financial plan for themselves and their spouse, but they also need a plan for their business. So they need an exit plan. And the earlier they do it, the better. And they certainly shouldn't do it any later than 3 years before they're looking to exit. So now we got a personal financial plan and all the problems that come along with that, from retirement planning to retirement income planning to tax planning to investment management to insurance planning and estate planning. And that's just personal stuff. Then we get into business planning, exit planning, which now we're looking at a customer concentration, de-risking, key man insurance. We're looking at who's going to take over the company. We're looking at whether or not we have the right key staff in place, whether there's retention bonuses or salaries and contracts in place to keep that key staff in place, whether we have continuity planning in place. So all the things you need to plan for an exit. And then we have the exit taking place. And then the owner also owns real estate as part of their business. Do we want to own real estate in the business, or do we want to own it separately in a separate LLC? Well, I think we know the answer to that. We want to own it separately, right? But not only that, but when we sell the business as a separate transaction, do we want to keep the real estate? Well, maybe we keep the real estate. We set up a new lease with the buyer, but now do we really want to keep it? Well, we can sell it. Well, do we want to pay the cap gains on that? Do we want to pay all the cap gains on the business? Well, if we take the business and we sell it, let's just say for $10 million, we can take a portion of that. Let's just say we keep 7, we take 3 million, and we 1031 that into a qualified opportunity zone, defer the taxes for a couple of years, get tax-free income over the course of 10 years, and then take the proceeds and capital appreciation after 10 years and get a tax-free bump on top of that. So now we've just created some tax-free income and growth out of a portion of our business sale. And then for our property, the commercial property we owned, maybe instead of selling that and paying the capital gains, let's just say we paid $500,000 for it. It's worth 2. We 1031 that into a Delaware statutory trust. We get institutional property management. We get a yield of 4.5 to 5.5% per year. We keep 1031ing it over and over and over again until we die. Our kids get the property tax free. All the while we deferred those cap gains. I don't know that AI is going to be able to give us all that advice. That's a lot. I mean, everything there is an example of a real life client who is a business owner, who is selling their business, who owns commercial property, who needs a personal financial plan. And just by throwing some things at AI, you have to prompt it with things. You have to tell it what you're looking for, and it's not going to know all the answers. So comprehensive planning, especially for people, and it doesn't have to be business owners, it can be people with complex situations. So not just a 401k and an IRA and, $500,000 under management. It takes a lot more than that.
Yeah, and I think that's really it, is that context, like you said, is because that is a long list of things. And I know that, in my working with ChatGPT, on projects and things like that, is that it does sort of lose its train of thought when you're going through a complex process like that. I don't know if train of thought is
No, you're
quite the
right.
right word, but it's, as you mentioned, there's a lot of things to keep in mind, and they're all unique things to every client, the data points that you're thinking about. And you've got I'm not sure exactly how many years you've been a financial planner, but you've got your experience, you're a CFP, you've got your other designations, you've got the experience, you've seen it. And I think that's something that's, yeah, AI is going to gain experience, but it's not going to gain that same real life experience because it's just going to capture the data that it's able to.
Yep. We've
And
seen this before. I mean, we've seen it before with robo advisors. I mean, does anybody talk about robo advisors anymore?
not much. It is all AI. I think AI is going to replace, personally, I think it's going to replace the advisor who's just constructing portfolios and doing data driven work. But the advisor who's looking at, like you said, is like all these different things. And then, you know, the client who's going to say, well, I don't want my oldest son to have a role in the business because, whatever reason is, that's a lot for AI to handle, where something you can say, okay, I know how to, omit the son from the transaction or having a role or whatever. And I'm just picking, the oldest son, but, there's all these factors that go into planning, and you only named like, just an overview, that I would imagine
Yeah.
it's a
No, I mean,
multi-page report.
I
you
opened up the
know
fire hose on purpose there. I mean, I went on a rant because I wanted to make a point that there is so much, and I just cracked the surface that can go into one person's financial plan, especially a business owner, entrepreneur, that it's a lot for AI to handle. And as I'm listening to you talk, by the way, it's even even if it's simpler than that, I just I don't know. I think about myself. Like there's certain things I like to nerd out on. Like I love to nerd out with ChatGPT on, my precision genetic test and my blood work. What should I be eating? What shouldn't I be eating? And when? What supplements should I be taking? I love that stuff. It's interesting to me. But at the end of the day, I'm calling my health coach up for bottom line answers, right? I find it really interesting to ChatGPT and use AI for a lot of things. But when I think of medicine, I'm not going to diagnose myself, not to mention when it comes to financial planning and one's health. I think that there's some similarities we can draw between the two because there's people who just don't want to go to the doctor. And how well does that go if you just skip, your annual physical for 5, 10, 15 years? I mean, then all of a sudden you find something that you didn't catch because you waited too long. Well, the same goes in financial planning. And if you don't do it, if you like it, but you don't spend the time on it, then you're probably not going to like the results. And the same goes for your health as it does for financial planning. But there's people out there, I think a lot of that 10 to 15% that want to use ChatGPT to replace the financial advisor, financial planner. I think most of them are trying to save money. And honestly, I think most of those people probably aren't good clients for us because those are the same people that they're going to try and pinch pennies and save money absolutely everywhere in their life. And they just don't see the value in anything else. They'd rather just do it themselves. Now, quantitatively, does it end up hurting them in the long run through, rates of return, staying in the market at certain points when they should have? Probably, but you can't really quantify it anyway. And honestly, if you could semi prove it to them, they would just argue with you anyway. So what's the point? It's like talking politics at Thanksgiving. I mean, who cares? So I'd rather focus on the 85% who want good help, who want that coach, that person to hold their hand and be by their side to treat them like extended family and help them get from, now to the promised land and beyond.
Yeah, well, I think you nailed it. Is that people have to want the advice that it has nothing to do with the data because, yeah, if you have a professional, you are going to get benefit from that professional. But if you don't think that's something you want, it
Yep.
gets back to the snowblowing. Is you could bring in a professional snowblower. I don't know if such a thing exists, but let's say there is a professional snowblower and they've got like the latest in snowblowing technology. Yeah, they could probably do it twice as fast as you. And I don't know. I mean, I don't want to insult your snowblowing
Oh no, it's
arts,
fine. You're not gonna hurt my feelings.
but I think, that's a thing that we need to consider is, yeah, somebody's going to have like the latest equipment. They've done it a lot, so they may be able to do it faster or they may be able to do it better, but they're going to provide a benefit based on their experience and the tools that they have as a professional. And I think that's something with financial planners, or other professional advisors that sometimes, the general consumer doesn't see that benefit in hiring a professional advisor. But for people who are listening who aren't sure about hiring a professional advisor, is those are things to think about. Advisors do this all day. This is their field of expertise. Just think about the knowledge you have in your area of expertise
Mhm.
and how hard-earned it was. So, you know, this is fascinating. I want to wrap up with what I call the Get Ready Hot Take Trio. These are three quick questions that I ask all of my guests. Um, the first one is, what money myth are you trying to break?
Honestly, and this is a controversial one, um, it's that you have to be in the market all the time. I know that there are lots of people who have swallowed the myth, in my opinion, that is efficient market hypothesis and modern portfolio theory. But it's not my opinion. It has been proven several times over that modern portfolio theory works really, really well when the market's going up, but it doesn't work so well when it's going down. So what's the point? If it only works when it's going up, right? If all correlation coefficients come to one when the market's going down and everything goes down, then what's the point of diversification in the eyes of Harry Markowitz from back in 1952? In fact, it was Eugene Fama, I believe, in 1993, who confirmed Harry Markowitz. Nobel Peace Prize on modern portfolio theory, with one exception, which was that the momentum investing and following what I like to call the playoff teams. So staying invested in the playoff teams and avoiding the rest was the main embarrassment to modern portfolio theory. So I think the biggest money myth from an investment standpoint is that we all have to stay invested and diversified in the market all the time. And I think the reason that myth exists is because of all the ETF companies and mutual fund companies and annuity companies out there who have pushed out this research that if you sell, then your performance is going to get worse. But two things. One, they don't, do any research about what happens when you miss the worst days in the market. They also don't do any research about when you miss both days, both the worst and the best days, which, by the way, when you do the research, it turns out that the best and the worst days fall very closely together during high volatile times, usually when the market's going down and precipitous big crashes. So there's a way to miss both. And then, second of all, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that the mutual fund companies, the annuity companies, the ETF companies are pushing this research because if you sell, they don't get paid.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, that's a reason for somebody to have a human advisor who can talk that through with them, and help educate them. And it comes back to financial literacy, which is one of the reasons I started the podcast, because knowing what questions to ask, helps you succeed, because this is advanced knowledge. Like you said, is, somebody's going to say, well, I've read it everywhere. And this is what everybody says, so how can it be wrong?
Sure.
And that's not the right question. The question is like, is this the right advice for me? And so
That's
I
right.
think that's a great myth to break. Um, and as you point out, is it was 1952 when, that stat came out, and it was very different. There were no ETFs, there were no mutual funds, there were no people can buy individual stocks. They had to buy them in big lots, if I recall correctly, and things like that. It was a very different time, and there wasn't the
73 years ago.
technology we have. Yeah,
73, it was the
things
year
have
my dad was
changed.
born. It's like
Uh,
things have changed a little bit.
we'll say a tad.
Yeah.
So, speaking of that, let's get out the time machine for a minute. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, knowing what you know now about money, what would that advice be?
About money. Okay. About money. That's a good question. I thought you were going to ask me about business or the career, which is so much easier to answer. Um,
Or just life in general that people could apply to their money?
you're going to have to cut this and let me think for a second. I think it would be a, I think the answer would be a piggyback off the last answer and the things that you just got done saying, and that is don't question everything. Like I wouldn't say question absolutely everything to the point of where you're incessantly questioning things, because there is such a thing as, not making a decision is a decision, I always say. But I think that asking a lot of questions, because a lot of the call it common advice that's out there, the things you see in articles and books, how can you possibly write a book that provides advice to 340 million people, right? So I think that, as you mentioned a couple times on this podcast, that advice is specific. It's like a fingerprint. Everybody's different. I think it would be good that when it comes to money, don't just assume that what you read in a book is true. Don't just assume that what you saw in an article was true. Don't just assume that when you chat GPT something, the answer you got is the truth for you, because it might not be. I think that's, again, probably goes back to, I don't want to rewind here, but it goes back to one of the things we talked a lot about today, which is why it's so important to have somebody who's looking at you like a personal physician, and not just, walking you into their office and, not checking any blood work, not checking your reflexes, not checking your heart rate, blood pressure, and just saying, here's some medicine, let's see if this works.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that is just the best advice is like, finance is personal. It's different for all of
Yeah.
us. And there's all these other factors that are coming into play. So to wrap up, here's the last question is, what's your number one tip for helping people change the way they think and talk about money?
I think it's going to be a roundabout way in terms of thinking about money, because most people don't have a financial plan. And my number one tip for absolutely every individual, whether you're just getting started, if you're a high achieving professional, if you're a business owner, it doesn't make a difference. Most people don't have financial plans. And I think that once you put your very first plan in place, your eyes can be open to all the things that maybe you are doing wrong, all the things that you can change and improve upon. And I think it can make you think a lot differently about money, to know exactly what you need, as opposed to just hoping you're going to make it. And I think that's what a financial plan does. A written, comprehensive plan that's made for you and your family. It helps you figure out exactly whether you're on track or not, and what you need to do to get on track, so that you can go, move through the rest of your life with confidence. If you need to save X, and then you didn't know that, and now you're let's just say, hypothetically speaking, you're putting away 15-16% of your income all of a sudden, because that's what the plan says you need to do. Now you don't feel so guilty spending a little bit of extra money on the car you've always wanted, let's just say, or going on that vacation, and you feel guilty about it because you don't want to spend the money on that vacation, because you're like, oh, should I be doing this? It's like, well, now you know. So I think financial plans, a written financial plan, it's so boring in terms of, it's not creative advice, but it's absolutely the best piece of advice I think any financial advisor or professional can give any client, to get them to think differently about money in their house.
I love it. And I think that harkens back to what you were talking about earlier, like with physicals, is, just as an example, is having a blood test and finding out that your cholesterol is a little bit high. If you diagnose it early, it's not a problem. But if you let it go and you haven't diagnosed it, it could develop into something huge. So
Yep.
that's awesome advice. Love it. So Adam, where can people learn more about you, and where can they tune into the Retirement Fiduciary Podcast?
Oh, you just took the words out of my mouth. So if you're looking for education, just like the stuff we're talking about today, we have a podcast called the Retirement Fiduciary. It's just everything from basic financial planning stuff, like the stuff we've been talking about today, to complex things for business owners. So that would be the first place. The second place would just go to libertaswealth.com, our website. And you can always find me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And for everybody watching and listening, as always, if you have access to the show notes, you'll be able to find links to Libertas website and to the Retirement Fiduciary Podcast in the show notes. Adam, thanks for coming on today.
Oh, thank you so much. It was fun.
Yeah, this was great. And as always, thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of Get Ready Before Life Happens. If something today sparked an insight, please be sure to share with a friend and subscribe. You can also go to my website at tonystewart.com to join the Get Ready movement and receive access to a whole bunch of free tools and my weekly newsletter. Until next time, let's change the way we think about money.